You know that specific feeling when you try to explain what it was like before smartphones to someone who's never known a world without them? It's a lot like trying to describe well, what silence actually sounds like to a person who has spent their entire life standing inside a crowded stadium. They nod along when you talk about it, of course, but you can look straight into their eyes and tell they don't really get it. If you happen to be born in that strange little pocket of time between the late 1970s and the early 1980s, you are part of something increasingly rare. We are the bridge generation. We had one foot planted firmly in the old analog past, and the other foot stumbling, sometimes face first, right into the digital future. By the time we finish our conversation today, you're going to see your place in this modern world a bit differently. You're going to understand the value of the things we carry, and maybe realize why we're the ones who have to keep the real world alive before it completely disappears into the screen. See, we happen to be the very last people who remember what it felt like when the world just moved slower. Back then, boredom wasn't considered some kind of modern psychological emergency. It was just a regular, expected part of a Tuesday afternoon. Going online back then meant sitting down at a specific desk, completely tying up the family phone line for an hour, and listening to that awful, but somehow beautiful, screech of the modem trying to connect.
We didn't grow up with Wi-Fi floating invisibly through the air. We didn't have these endless dopamine loops of social media rewiring our brains from the time we were 6 years old. And we definitely couldn't just Google our own thoughts the exact second they popped into our heads. If you had a question back then, you just had to sit with it for a while. You had to go find a physical book or ask around the neighborhood, or just accept the fact that some mysteries were going to stay mysteries. That sounds almost ancient now, doesn't it? Like a story from a completely different century. To us, that wasn't history. It was just regular life.
Think back to how we used to make actual plans with our friends. When we made plans, we just hopped on our bicycles right after breakfast, disappear into the neighborhood for 6 or 7 hours, and show up at a friend's house completely unannounced. No group chats with 47 unread messages where everyone eventually flakes out anyway. You'd walk up, ring the doorbell, and just hope they were home. If they weren't, well, you didn't text them from the driveway. You just rode your bike to the next buddy's house down the road. There was no texting ahead to confirm. There were no on-my-way updates every 5 minutes. Our parents certainly weren't tracking our exact location on a digital map like we were a package being delivered by a courier.
Your curfew was incredibly simple. When the streetlights came on, you better be standing in the driveway. That was the whole agreement. Being left alone after school was just standard back then. They called us Latchkey kids. We'd let ourselves into an empty house with a brass key hidden under the porch mat, make some kind of afternoon snack that was probably 90% pure sugar, and then we had to figure out how to fill the hours before our parents got home. We learned to be resourceful because there wasn't another option. We learned to get bored, and then we learned how to unbore ourselves without a device.
We built forts out of scrap wood in the trees, invented incredibly weird games with whatever junk was lying around the yard. And sometimes we just stared at the bedroom ceiling for an hour, wondering what to do with ourselves. That's a specific skill most kids today are never going to develop. There's simply no space left for boredom anymore. When you've got an infinite scroll sitting right there in your palm, ready to aggressively fill every single quiet moment you have.
We learned to fix things, to tinker, to handle things entirely on our own. But look, I don't want to make it sound like we were geniuses. It actually meant we made some incredibly stupid, messy mistakes because we didn't have a video tutorial to bail us out. I should probably admit something right here before I get too far into this, because I am definitely no exception to that rule. A few years back, I decided I was going to change the rear brake pads on my SUV myself, right here in the garage. Simple job, right? I'd done it 100 times on older trucks when I was younger.
So I'm out there on a freezing Saturday afternoon, knees grinding into the cold gravel, dirt under my fingernails, feeling real good about my DIY skills. I take the brake caliper off, get my heavy old steel C-clamp, and I start cranking it down hard to push the piston back into the housing. Just forcing it. What I didn't realize, because I hadn't bothered to read a manual or look anything up, was that this specific model of SUV used an electronic parking brake system. You don't just shove a mechanical C-clamp in there. You have to retract the electronic motor through a computer setting first.
But I didn't know that. I just kept cranking that steel clamp, putting all my weight into it, thinking the piston was just a little rusted or stuck. And then I heard it. The loud, sickening crunch of $1,200 in German engineering snapping completely in half inside that plastic housing. I froze. And right at that exact second, I looked up and saw my wife watching me from the kitchen window, just slowly shaking her head. A $1,200 repair bill, a total self-own. All because I was stubborn. And because figuring things out the hard way sometimes means you break things. But that's how we actually learned. Responsibility.
From the early 80s right through the 2000s, our generation witnessed some of the wildest structural shifts in human history. We watched the world shrink practically overnight as technology exploded all around us. Eventually, smartphones turned every single spare moment of life into content, and every regular guy into a potential broadcaster. We lived through some heavy historical turning points, too. Columbine shook all of us in a way that felt entirely new and terrifying for high school kids. We watched news, violence, and spectacle get fused together in real time on television, right in our living rooms every night. And then 9/11 happened, and the whole world changed its locks. We were the ones who saw what happens when tragedy collides with mass media for the very first time. Reality started becoming entertainment, and we didn't even realize it was happening until the transition was already complete. Now, let's talk about what that did to how we actually connect with each other. There was a time when connection required your actual physical presence in a room. If you wanted to see your friends, you had to physically go to the coffee shop or the park, or just hang out on old couches in someone's damp basement. You showed up. You existed in the exact same space, breathed the same air, and you had these long, meandering conversations that went absolutely nowhere and everywhere all at once. Then social media arrived, and slowly, bit by bit, those physical spaces started emptying out. Now we connect through small pieces of glowing glass. We share these highly filtered snapshots of our lives instead of sharing our unfiltered, messy moments. We perform our lives for an audience instead of just living them. We have never been more connected in human history, yet so many men I talk to feel more isolated than they ever have in their lives. We traded truth for algorithms, and most of us barely even noticed the transaction taking place until the deal was done. Reality TV was really the gateway drug for all of this. Think back to when it started. It took completely ordinary, regular people and turned them into edited characters. It made drama the primary currency and outrage the main product. Somewhere along the line, our entire culture started valuing performance over actual substance. Why bother being real when real doesn't get likes?
Now, a lot of us are dealing with this from a completely different perspective. We're raising kids in a world we don't fully recognize anymore. Most of us were raised by boomers who believed in scraped knees, climbing trees, and facing natural consequences. You grew up with freedom, but you also had accountability in roughly equal measure. You could mess up, and you'd have to face the music. But you also had the room to figure things out on your own terms. Now that we're the parents, the game has completely changed. Devices have replaced discipline in a lot of modern households. Screens have become the default permanent babysitter. And in our desperate attempts to protect our kids from every single possible harm, stranger, or discomfort, we might be accidentally robbing them of the exact grit and resilience we developed by actually living in the world, getting hurt, and learning how to get back up on our own feet. It's a strange, uncomfortable position to be in as a father or a mentor. We remember exactly what it was like before all this noise. But we're also raising kids who will never know that another world even existed. How do you teach someone to value something they've never experienced?
There's something about the analog world that digital life just cannot replicate, no matter how many millions of dollars they spend trying. Think about Friday nights at Blockbuster, walking up and down those brightly lit blue and yellow aisles, trying to find one movie everyone in the house could agree on. Or the satisfying heavy clack of a cassette deck when you popped in a new tape you bought with your own lawn mowing money. The pure buzz and chaos of a local arcade on a weekend, with rows of quarters lined up on the glass screen to claim the next game. There was a patience required back then. You had to rewind a VHS tape before you took it back, or you'd get hit with a fee. You had to wait an entire week to get your film photos back from the drugstore developer, not even knowing if any of them were in focus or if you accidentally ruined the roll. We didn't just consume things back then. We created things. We used our hands, our imagination, and a genuine sense of wonder that didn't need an internet connection to exist. Now, kids are growing up with cameras pointed at their faces before they can even crawl. Their entire lives are documented, edited, and broadcast to the public in real time. Their first steps, their first words, their most embarrassing childhood moments, all of it lives forever somewhere on a corporate server. Validation comes in the form of likes and shares before they are even old enough to understand what those metrics mean. Relationships are curated. Reality is heavily edited. And the whole concept of privacy, of having something that is just yours, something that exists only in your own memory and nowhere else, that is fading fast. Platforms like Instagram turned everyone into a personal brand. OnlyFans turned intimacy into a business model.
Attention became the primary currency of our culture, but it's a fragile economy built entirely on sand. When everything is about being seen by strangers, who is left to just be? And now, we're looking at the next frontier. It isn't even social media anymore. It's artificial intelligence. And it is moving faster than any of us can actually process. AI can write articles, paint pictures, compose music, and generate images that look completely real but aren't. It's incredible technology, sure, but it's deeply unsettling at the exact same time. When machines can create things faster and better than most humans, what happens to human creativity? What happens to our sense of purpose? What happens to the soul that used to be in the work? I think the scariest part of this technology is how quickly we as men might forget what it means to do things ourselves, to struggle with a task, to make something imperfect with our hands, to leave our actual fingerprints all over it.
Digital culture feels like it's permanent, but it's actually incredibly fragile. One server crash, one company going under, or one policy change, and entire eras of art, music, and thought could just disappear into a black screen. The old worried left behind things you could actually hold. It left letters in desks, photographs in cardboard shoeboxes, and vinyl records that would easily outlast their original owners. The new world leaves behind data. Data that can be completely erased with a single keystroke. We have the entire sum of human knowledge sitting right inside our pockets. Yet most of us spend our limited hours watching people dance or argue on the internet. Progress used to mean curing diseases, exploring deep space, and pushing the boundaries of what humanity could achieve. Now, it mostly just means upgrading to the newest iPhone every September. Look, it's not that technology ruined us. Technology is just a tool, plain and simple. It's just that we forgot how to use the tool without letting the tool use us. Maybe the answer isn't rejecting the digital world entirely. That ship has sailed. And honestly, there are parts of it that have made our daily lives genuinely better. But maybe we need to intentionally remember the world that came before it. We need to actively bring back the long, meandering conversations that go nowhere. The in-person laughter that doesn't need to be recorded on video. The messy, imperfect, beautifully human moments that exist just for us and no one else. We are the last generation that remembers both worlds. We lived in the before, and we are living in the after. That's a heavy legacy to carry. It gives us a perspective that is going to be completely gone once we are gone. And maybe, just maybe, that means we are the exact ones who can help bridge these two worlds.
before the real world disappears completely into the screen. And no one is left who remembers what we lost along the way.